Chapter 2 of Tractate Yevamos further discusses the laws of the levirate marriage, the laws of a woman who either marries her brother-in-law after her husband's passing, leaving no children, or the rejection of this marriage, called chalitza. The bond that's created between her and her brother-in-law that forces her to either marry him or do the chalitza ceremony to not marry him is referred to as zika. The Mishnah says, in the case where there are two brothers and one passes childless, and then there's a third brother that's born, the second brother married the first brother's wife through Yibam, and then he also dies, the third brother is exempt from Yibam and Chalitza from both brothers' wives, as he's a non-contemporary brother. He wasn't alive when he died, and the second brother's wife was also her co-wife. If the second brother had only betrothed the first brother's wife and then died, the second brother's wife cannot do Yibam, but must do Chalitza. The Gemara clarifies points on the wording of this, saying the widow can be referred to as the widow of the first or second husband. It also brings the source for these points from verses. Some say, if a woman was waiting to go through Yibam, but then died, the man is allowed to marry her mother. Some suggest this, as this opinion holds there is no Zika bond between the widow and her brother-in-law, but he can only marry the mother after she passes, as he has the first obligation to marry the widow. Others disagree, saying there is a Zika bond, and it's debated. These opinions are challenged based off many related cases. This is debated further. Some clarify the opinion to be that the Zika bond does exist, and it doesn't vanish after the widow dies, hence the issue with marrying the mother. There are a few different opinions on this topic, but we do seem to hold that such a bond does exist. New Mishnah. If there were two brothers, the first dies childless, so the second does Yibam, marrying his widow, and then a third brother is born, and then the second brother died childless. Again, he's exempt from Yibam and Chalitza to both brothers' wives, as he's a non-contemporary brother to the first. He wasn't born yet, and the second is the other's co-wife. If the second brother had only betrothed the first brother's wife before he passed, his widow cannot have Yibam and must do Chalitza. Others disagree with this case, saying if both brothers married and died, the third brother should do Yibam or Chalitza to either of them. The Gemara explains the logic of the disagreeing opinion, saying it's due to an apparent redundancy, essentially between this Mishnah and the previous. There's further discussion on this. The opinions are argued on. There's different interpretations of the disagreeing opinion as to what exactly is going on. Some say he's referring to a case where the first two brothers married sisters, and also a mother and daughter, like this. Others disagree based on a source. Alternative suggestions are brought, and it's further debated. We bring the case from a source of a few listed cases to find the one where the opinions disagree. There are several of these cases, and the last one is where a brother does Yibam, and then a third brother is born, and then the second brother dies childless. Some would say both are widows and exempt from Yibam and Chalitza, and the disagreeing opinion would say he can do Yibam or Chalitza with either widow, as the third brother and them only ever were permitted to each other, and were never in a state of impermissibility to each other. He wouldn't disagree with the first opinion if he was born before Yibam was done. There's actually a number of particular cases discussed, which are debated between the two opinions, but they can be summarized pretty concisely into this chart, so this is basically the whole discussion. They're discussed a bit further though. New Mishnah. Generally, regarding the widow, if she's forbidden to marry due to the general laws of who you can and can't marry the brother-in-law, she cannot do Yibam and is exempt from Chalitza. If they can't marry due to a mitzvah or due to sanctity, which will be explained, they can't do Yibam, but they require Chalitza. If there are two sisters who both are widowed by brothers, the third brother can do Yibam or Chalitza with one of them if it's impermissible for him to marry the other. Unable to marry due to a mitzvah is the instituted prohibition against marrying secondary relatives. And unable to marry due to sanctity is the prohibition against a widow marrying a Kohen Gadol, or a divorcee or similar to a Kohen, or a child of a forbidden union, or a Nesonite to anyone, either as the husband or wife. The Gemara says the general rule comes to include the co-wife of an Ilonis, again someone with Turner syndrome essentially, as exempt from Yibam or Chalitza, according to one opinion. Others say it's actually disagreeing with this opinion. The remaining points are further qualified, and there are some unique exemptions discussed. It also gets into some other cases. What if a Kohen Gadol impermissibly did Yibam with his brother's widow? There's disagreement if the widow's co-wife is still connected to the widow in regards to the laws of Yibam. There's further discussion on this, some sources, and a list of all the secondary relatives as to what is considered to fall into this category that you cannot marry. Here's a chart listing basically all of the biblically prohibited marriages that are specifically written, and all of the rabbinically forbidden marriages of secondary relatives. These are further qualified, along with some specific cases, and they're all discussed further at length. Others say the chart is as follows, including all of these in addition. This is further discussed, again with some particular cases, and some add that converts have no rabbinic prohibition from marrying these secondary relatives. On the topic of converts, it says that paternal brothers who converted can testify together, and maternal brothers, some say they can, some say they can't, but if they did, it's still valid. This is because conversion basically resets all of your relationships. You're considered like a newborn, and all prior familial relationships don't exist. Now, not everybody's aware of this, so we're still strict by marriage, that they can't marry their relatives after they convert, but a court knows these laws, so they can accept their testimony. New Mishnah. If someone has a brother of any kind, Yibum will apply, and he's considered his brother by everything, unless the brother is from a Canaanite maidservant or idolatrous. If you have a son of any kind, that makes Yibum no longer necessary, and the son would be liable for wounding or cursing his father, and is his son by everything, unless he's from a Canaanite maidservant or idolatrous. The Gemara says, a brother of any kind includes even a bastard, which is necessary to say based on some verses. Them being brothers for everything is to include them being impure for each other, which is also necessary from some verses, and this is further explained. A son of any kind is to, again, include a bastard. Verses are discussed, and this is all qualified further. There's additional discussion on these verses. It mentions famously, based on one of the verses, that a person is Jewish based on his mother alone, meaning if a person is born to a non-Jewish father and a Jewish mother, he's considered totally 100% Jewish, and if he's born to a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother, he is not considered Jewish. This is further discussed. New Mishnah. If someone betrothed one of two sisters, but he's not sure which, he has to divorce both of them. If he died without divorcing them, his brother must do chalitza with both of them. If the dead brother has two brothers, one must do chalitza and the other can do yibum. If both brothers married both sisters, they don't need a divorce. If two unrelated men betrothed two sisters and neither knows which he betrothed, both of them must give a divorce document to both of them. If both men died childless without divorcing and each has a brother, both must do chalitza with both sisters. If the first dead guy had one brother and the second had two brothers, the single brother should do chalitza with both, and the first of the two brothers should do chalitza and the other can do yibum. If the two brothers marry the sisters, they don't need a divorce. If both dead guys had two brothers, one of each brother must do chalitza with one, and the others can do yibum with the sister that the opposite brother did chalitza with. If two of the brothers did chalitza with both, one must do chalitza and the other can do yibum. If they both married them, they don't need a divorce. The Gemara tries to learn from this that marriage is still valid even if you cannot legally cohabitate, but we say no, as the marriage made initially was where they could cohabitate, and it was only after that the sisters got mixed up. These points are further discussed if we can learn this from any part of the Mishnah. The explanation of the cases are further qualified. New Mishnah. The commandment is for the eldest brother to do yibum, but if the youngest did it, it's still valid. The Gemara cites and discusses sources for this. New Mishnah. If there's a rumor about someone that he cohabited with a slave woman who was later set free, or with an idolatress who later converted, he cannot then marry either of them. But if he did, they don't need a divorce. If there's rumors about someone cohabiting with a married woman, and the court rules she should divorce her husband, she cannot marry the other man. And if they do, they must divorce. The Gemara discussed these cases, and there are some additional points on these topics. New Mishnah. If an agent brings a divorce document from abroad and says that it was written and signed in his presence, he's not allowed to marry the divorced woman. If someone testifies about a man that he died, or he or we killed him, the testifier is not allowed to marry the dead man's wife. Some add that if the testifier said, I killed him, the woman cannot marry anybody now, as the witness had admitted he's a sinner, and thus disqualified his own testimony, leaving her unsure if her husband actually died. If he said, we killed him, then she may remarry. The Gemara explains these cases. Basically, it's as we rely on the testimony of these individuals, the marriage is therefore impermissible after. They're further discussed. It also explains the difference by saying we killed him. It's as he's saying I was with somebody who killed him, which is discussed. New Mishnah. If a sage prohibited a woman to be with her husband by not nullifying a vow against her from being with her husband, the sage may not now marry the woman. If a woman refused the husband or did chalitza before a sage in court, the sage is permitted to marry her, as he was doing this as a court function. The Gemara explains points on these cases along with the debate. If they did marry by the vow case, if they actually need to get divorced or not. New Mishnah. By all of the above cases where a testimony or a court function or similar prevents someone from marrying the involved woman, this does not apply if the man was married at the time and the wife later died. Also, with all of the women, if after the incident they married somebody else and then were divorced or widowed, they can then marry the guy from the case. Also, the women are all permitted to the sons or brothers of those involved in the case. The Gemara discusses these points in regards to marrying the brother of the involved individual. That's allowed as either there's no concern of her meeting up with the guy through the relative, as men don't typically visit each other, or it's because the husband won't permit such a thing, as it'll lead to an impermissible marriage on his end. This might be a concern by a father to son, but a son has respect and awe of his father, so he won't cohabit with his wife. And that's the end of chapter 2.